Have you ever felt judged the moment you walked into a room? Judged for reasons you can't control? We've all felt it. But what if that judgment didn't just lead to whispers, but to a full-blown public confrontation at 30,000 feet? This is the story of David Sterling, a brilliant father, taking his little girl on a dream vacation. He was a passenger in first class, but to one flight attendant, he was a threat. She pushed him, questioned him, and humiliated him again and again, refusing to believe he belonged. She had no idea she wasn't just questioning a passenger. She was challenging the one man who held the power to bring the entire aircraft to a standstill. And with one single phone call, he did. The air in the Aerovista Airlines first-class lounge at JFK was a carefully curated symphony of quiet efficiency. The clinking of porcelain on saucer, the hushed murmur of conversations about stock options and Nantucket weekends, the faint scent of expensive perfume and freshly brewed espresso. It was a world away from the controlled chaos of the main terminal. For 7-year-old Lily Sterling, it was a magical kingdom. Her small fingers traced the patterns on the plush velvet armchair she was perched on, her wide, curious eyes taking in everything. In her lap, clutched tightly, was Captain Barnaby, a well-loved teddy bear with one button eye and a frayed pilot's scarf. Her father, David Sterling, watched her with a soft smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His eyes held a familiar weariness, the kind that came from being the sole architect of a child's universe. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored grey cashmere sweater and dark jeans. On his wrist was a sleek, understated watch, a Patek Philippe Calatrava, a quiet testament to a success he rarely felt the need to broadcast. Today was special. After a grueling 6-month project, he was finally taking Lily to Disneyland. It was a promise he had made to her and to his late wife, and he intended to keep it in style. Daddy Lily whispered, her voice full of awe. "Do you think Captain Barnaby can have some of the tiny sandwiches?" David chuckled a low, warm sound. "I think Captain Barnaby would love that, but only if his co-pilot eats some too." He flagged down a passing attendant, ordering a plate of crustless cucumber sandwiches and a glass of apple juice for Lily. The service was immediate and deferential. Here, in the anonymous luxury of the lounge, he was just another affluent traveller. The ticket was the great equalizer. His Amex Centurion card had paid for 2 first-class seats, 1A and 1B, on Flight 729 to Los Angeles. In this space, that was all that mattered, or so he thought. The boarding call for their flight was a gentle chime. David gathered their belongings, taking Lily's small hand in his. As they walked down the jet bridge, Lily's excitement was a palpable, buzzing energy. "We're in the very front, right, Daddy? Like real pilots." "That's right, sweetheart. Seat 1A. You're the captain today." He settled her into the spacious, pod-like seat, a miniature throne of cream-colored leather. He helped her buckle Captain Barnaby into the empty space beside her, before taking his own seat. He felt a rare wave of relaxation wash over him. The hum of the auxiliary power unit was a soothing, white noise. The next 5 hours were for him and his daughter. No work, no calls, no distractions. As the other first-class passengers began to file in, a senior flight attendant, with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Brenda, moved through the cabin with an air of proprietary ownership. She greeted a silver-haired man in a suit with a warm, familiar smile. She offered a pre-departure glass of champagne to a woman dripping in diamonds with practiced ease. When she reached row 1, her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Her eyes flickered from David's face to Lily's, and then to their seat numbers, as if performing a quick, skeptical calculation. "Good morning, David," said his voice even and polite. Brenda's response was a clipped, "Boarding passes, please." Her tone was a stark contrast to the welcoming one she'd used with the other passengers. David retrieved his phone, pulled up the digital passes, and showed her the screen. She leaned in, her gaze lingering for a fraction of a second too long. "And you are Mr. Sterling?" she asked, her eyes flicking back to his face. "I am," he replied, a familiar, cold knot tightening in his stomach. He had hoped just for today he wouldn't have to feel it. She nodded slowly, her lips pursed. "Welcome aboard," she said, but the words were hollow, stripped of any genuine warmth. As she turned away, David saw her exchange a swift, meaningful glance with another passenger, a woman in her late 50s, with a face set in a permanent state of disapproval. The woman who had settled into seat 2C leaned forward and whispered something to Brenda. David couldn't hear the words, but he could read the expression on the woman's face. It was a cocktail of suspicion and indignation. Lily, oblivious, was pointing out the window. "Look, Daddy, a fuel truck. It looks like a big metal bug." David forced another smile, pushing down the rising tide of frustration. "It sure does, sweetie." He squeezed her hand, trying to anchor himself in her innocent joy. The plane was a sanctuary, a metal tube where the rules were simple. Sit down, buckle up, and get to your destination. But David had a sinking feeling that on Flight 729, the rules were about to be rewritten. The cabin door was sealed with a pneumatic hiss, shutting out the world and enclosing the 24 passengers of first class in their privileged bubble. The captain's voice, a folksy, reassuring baritone, crackled over the intercom, announcing their flight time and wishing them a pleasant journey. David helped Lily with her headphones, finding a Disney movie to occupy her during takeoff. As the plane taxied onto the runway, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and tried to reclaim the sense of peace he'd felt just 20 minutes earlier. It was not to be. Once they reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign pinged off, Brenda began her service. She moved with a rigid efficiency, her movements sharp and deliberate. When she arrived at David's seat, she ignored his empty pre-departure glass. "Sir," she said, her voice loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again." David opened his eyes. "I already showed it to you." "Procedure," she stated flatly. "We're doing a final manifest confirmation." This was David knew a lie. He'd flown first class hundreds of times. A final manifest confirmation after takeoff was not standard procedure. He saw the woman in 2C, Mrs. Davenport, according to the passenger list he'd glimpsed on Brenda's tablet, watching with undisguised interest. Sighing, David once again unlocked his phone and displayed the boarding pass. Brenda stared at it, then at him. "And your name is David Sterling, yes? It says so right there." He pointed to the screen. "I'll need to see a government-issued photo ID to verify that." The cold knot in his stomach coiled tighter. This was a deliberate escalation, a public challenge. He could feel the eyes of other passengers on him now. A young man across the aisle. Ben Carter looked over with a sympathetic but helpless expression. "Is there a problem?" David asked, keeping his voice low and steady. He didn't want to alarm Lily, who was thankfully absorbed in her movie, her small face illuminated by the screen. "I just need to verify your identity, sir. It's for the security of everyone on board." The implication was clear. His presence was a security concern. He thought about refusing. He thought about making a scene demanding to speak to the captain. But that would frighten Lily and only escalate the confrontation into a spectacle. So with a slow, deliberate motion, he reached into his carry-on, pulled out his wallet, and extracted his driver's license. He handed it to her. Brenda took it and held it up to the light, comparing the photo to his face with theatrical scrutiny. She tilted it back and forth, as if checking for a hologram. The silence stretched thick with accusation. Mrs. Davenport in 2C leaned forward, craning her neck for a better view of the interrogation. "The photo," Brenda began, her voice dripping with skepticism. "The lighting is a little different." David stared at her, his patience wearing dangerously thin. "It's a DMV photo. The lighting is always different." She hummed a sound of profound doubt. She handed it back to him dismissively. "Fine. For now." She moved on to the next passenger, her demeanor instantly transforming. "Mr. Henderson, can I get you started with another? Macallan 18. The whiplash of her change in tone was staggering. David sat back, his jaw tight. He was a non-person, an anomaly to be processed and contained, while the man behind him was a valued guest. He took a deep breath, focusing on the rhythmic sound of his daughter's soft breathing beside him. For Lily, he told himself. Just get through this for Lily. An hour passed. Drink service was completed. Lunch orders were taken. Brenda seemed to be avoiding row 1 entirely. David had to flag down a junior flight attendant, a young man named Alex, to get a glass of water for himself and some more apple juice for Lily. Just as he was starting to believe the ordeal was over, Brenda reappeared. She was holding her airline-issued tablet, her finger pointed at the screen. "Mr. Sterling," she said, the name sounding like an accusation on her tongue. "I'm seeing a flag on your ticket here." David knew his ticket was clean. It had been purchased directly from the airline, paid in full. There could be no flag. "That's impossible," he said. "The system says, otherwise," she insisted, not showing him the tablet. "It says, we need to re-verify. I need to see your ID again, sir. And this time I need a second form as well. A passport or a credit card with the same name." This was it. The final straw. This wasn't about procedure or a system flag. This was harassment, plain and simple. It was a power play designed to humiliate him, to force him into a position where he would either lash out and prove her suspicions correct, or submit entirely and affirm her authority. "This is ridiculous, Ben Carter," the man across the aisle suddenly spoke up. "He's shown you his ID. Just leave the man alone." Brenda shot him a venomous look. "Sir, I am in charge of this cabin. I suggest you stay out of official airline business." She turned back to David, her eyes cold and hard. "Your second form of ID. Now." Lily had taken off her headphones. She'd heard the sharp, commanding tone of Brenda's voice. Her lower lip began to tremble. "Daddy, is that lady mad at you?" That was the breaking point. The line had been crossed. This was no longer just about his pride or his dignity. This was about his daughter. He would not allow this woman's prejudice to cast a shadow on his child's world, to make her feel fear and uncertainty. David looked at Brenda, his calm demeanor finally cracking, replaced by a glacial fury. "You have made a serious, serious mistake," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying a weight that made Brenda pause. He reached for his phone. Not for his boarding pass, not for a digital ID. He swiped to a different screen, to a single contact, an icon he had never once had to use. Brenda smirked. "Who are you calling your lawyer? Go right ahead. We have a whole team of them." David ignored her. He looked past her, his gaze distant and focused. He pressed the call button, and the entire flight, the entire airline was about to find out just how serious a mistake she had made. The call connected on the first ring. There was no hold music, no automated menu. Just the immediate, crisp voice of a man accustomed to urgent, unscheduled communication. "This is Chen." David kept his voice low, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. "Robert, it's David Sterling." A beat of silence on the other end, then the voice sharpened with concern. "David, is everything okay? You've never used this line. I'm on one of your birds, Robert. Aerovista Flight 729 JFK to LAX, Seat 1A. Brenda watched her arms crossed, a smug expression on her face. She thought it was a bluff, an empty threat from a man trying to save face. Mrs. Davenport in 2C was whispering to her husband, both of them staring openly now. "What's the situation?" Robert Chen asked. David could hear the faint sound of furious typing in the background. Robert was already pulling up every piece of data associated with Flight 729. "I'm in the cabin, and I can no longer guarantee the integrity of the flight's operational security." David said each word chosen with surgical precision. This was the language Robert understood. It was the language of catastrophic failure, of zero-day exploits, and critical vulnerabilities. It had nothing to do with rude flight attendants or passenger disputes. "David, what are you seeing?" Robert's voice was now stripped of all pleasantries. "Is it Odyssey? Did you find a back door in the public Wi-Fi portal Odyssey? The code name for a project so secret, only a handful of people at the airline even knew it existed." "I can't confirm the specific vector from my seat," David replied, looking directly at Brenda. Her smugness was beginning to curdle into confusion. The technical jargon was beyond her, but the gravity in his tone was unmistakable. "But the human element on board has become an unpredictable variable. It's compromised. I am invoking Protocol 0. The typing on the other end of the line stopped. A heavy silence followed. Protocol 0 was the nuclear option. It was a fail-safe David himself had designed, a privilege granted to him and only him. It was a kill switch built on the terrifying understanding that some threats couldn't be patched or quarantined. They had to be contained at the source. "Understood," Robert finally said, his voice grim. "Protocol 0 is engaged. Stand by." The call ended. It had lasted less than 45 seconds. David put his phone away and turned his attention to his daughter. He stroked her hair, his touch gentle and reassuring. "It's okay, sweetie. Everything is going to be fine. We're just going to play a little waiting game." Lily nodded, leaning against him, her fear subsiding in the face of his renewed calm. Brenda, however, was now visibly unnerved. The confidence had evaporated, replaced by a dawning sense of dread. "What was that? What did you do?" Before David could answer, the intercom crackled to life, but it wasn't the captain's easygoing drawl. It was a clipped, authoritative voice, the co-pilot. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first officer. On instruction from our Central Operations Command, we are to immediately cease our forward progress. We will be turning back and returning to JFK Airport. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Cabin crew, prepare the cabin for landing. I repeat, cabin crew, prepare for an immediate return to JFK." A wave of confused murmuring swept through the entire plane, from first class to the last row of economy. People who had been dozing were now wide awake. Brenda's face went pale. She looked at David, her eyes wide, with a mixture of disbelief and terror. You didn't." The flight attendant's internal communication line began to chime insistently. Brenda fumbled for the horn set, her hand shaking. "This is Brenda." The voice on the other end was a furious squawk, audible even from a few feet away. It was the captain. "What the hell is going on in your cabin? Ops just got a Protocol 0 alert from this flight originating from Seat 1A. They're telling me it's a CSO-level security directive. They're grounding the plane. What did you do?" Brenda's blood ran cold. CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. She had no idea what that meant, but she knew it was catastrophically above her pay grade. Her eyes darted to David, who was now calmly helping Lily put away her coloring book. He wasn't just a passenger she had decided to harass. He was someone with a direct line to the highest levels of corporate command. Someone who could, with a single phrase, turn a 777 around in midair. Mrs. Davenport from 2C was on her feet. "This is outrageous. I have a connecting flight to Hawaii. Why are we turning back? Brenda didn't answer. She couldn't. She stumbled back, leaning against the bulkhead for support, the captain's angry words still ringing in her ears. She looked at the man in seat 1A, truly looked at him for the first time. Not as a suspicious anomaly, but as the epicenter of a disaster she had single-handedly created. The plane banked sharply, a heavy groaning turn that signaled their retreat. They were heading back to New York, and for Brenda Hatcher they were heading back to the end of her career. The flight hadn't just been diverted, it had been cancelled, and she was the reason why. The descent back to JFK was tense and silent. The usual chatter of a returning flight was replaced by an atmosphere thick with confusion and anger. Passengers in all classes were peppering the flight attendants with questions, none of whom had any answers. They only knew the order had come from the very top, citing a critical non-mechanical security issue. Brenda Hatcher avoided the first-class cabin, entirely delegating the landing preparations to the junior attendant, Alex. She sequestered herself in the galley, her mind racing. Protocol 0, CISO, seat 1A. The pieces were a terrifying, incomprehensible puzzle. Who was David Sterling? A government agent, an air marshal in disguise, an impossibly powerful executive. The moment the plane connected with the jet bridge at an isolated gate, the cabin door was opened, not by a ground agent, but by two stern-faced men in dark suits. They were from Aerovista Corporate Security. Behind them stood the flight operations manager, and the captain, his face a thunderous mask of fury. One of the security men, a tall man named Peterson, stepped inside. The flight is officially cancelled. All passengers will deplane here. Your tickets will be rebooked. Please collect your personal belongings. His announcement was met with a chorus of groans and angry shouts. "Ma'am, the captain," said his voice dangerously low as he addressed Brenda. A word. In the cockpit. Brenda followed him on numb legs, her career flashing before her eyes. Meanwhile, David was unbuckling Lily, who had fallen asleep during the descent. He gently woke her. "Time to go, sweetie. Little change of plans." As they stood to leave the man from 2C, Mr. Davenport glared at him. "I hope you're happy," he sneered. "Whatever you did, you've ruined everyone's day." David didn't even look at him. His focus was on his daughter. He gathered their bags, took Lily's hand, and walked toward the exit. As he passed Ben Carter, the young man who had tried to defend him, Ben gave him a small, respectful nod. "Well played, sir." David acknowledged him with a slight incline of his head and stepped out onto the jet bridge. A woman in a sharp business suit was waiting there, holding a tablet with his picture on it. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice a mixture of apology and reverence. "My name is Maria Fuentes. I'm the head of customer experience here at JFK. Please come with me. We have a private lounge for you and your daughter. Mr. Chen is on a video call for you, and we've already arranged for a private jet to take you to Los Angeles at your convenience." Lily's eyes went wide. A private jet. David smiled the first genuine smile in hours. "See, I told you it would be an adventure." He followed Maria Fuentes away from the disgruntled crowd, leaving the chaos of Flight 729 behind. Back on the plane, the reckoning had begun. In the cockpit, the captain tore into Brenda. "I have been flying for 30 years, he seethed. "Never, not once, has my flight been grounded from the outside. Corporate security is telling me the order came directly from the office of Robert Chen, the company's chief information security officer. They're saying a passenger initiated a security protocol I've never even heard of. They're saying it came from seat 1A. Now you're going to tell me word for word what happened with that passenger." Brenda, trembling, recounted the entire story, the multiple ID checks, the accusation of a flagged ticket, the involvement of Mrs. Davenport. With every word, the captain's face grew darker. When she was finished, he just stared at her. "So let me get this straight. You harassed a first-class passenger repeatedly without cause in front of his child because you decided he didn't look right. I was following security procedures." She began, her voice weak. Not the captain cut her off. "You were indulging in prejudice, and you did it on my aircraft. You compromised the safety and well-being of a passenger, which is the one thing we are here to prevent." He gestured for Peterson, the corporate security man, to enter the cockpit. "She's all yours. Escort her off the premises. Her credentials are to be revoked immediately pending a full investigation." Brenda gasped. "You can't just fire me. I'm not the captain," said coldly. "I'm just grounding you. The people Mr. Sterling called are the ones who will be firing you," as Peterson led a stunned Brenda down the jet bridge, not as a crew member, but as a liability. Another drama was unfolding. A local news reporter tipped off about a flight being mysteriously cancelled. Mid-air was at the gate, filming the angry passengers as they emerged. She managed to get a sound bite from an irate Mrs. Davenport. "It was disgraceful," Mrs. Davenport declared to the camera. "This one man in 1A was causing a scene. The poor flight attendant was just trying to do her job to keep us safe, and he made some sort of threat, and they turned the whole plane around. He should be arrested." The reporter, a tenacious journalist named Sarah Jenkins, smelled a much bigger story. A single passenger cancelling a flight, it didn't add up. She noted the passenger's description and his seat number. She had a lead. The story that aired on the 10 o'clock news was simple. A passenger dispute leads to a chaotic flight cancellation at JFK. But Sarah Jenkins wasn't satisfied. She started digging into the flight manifest. She wanted to know the name of the man in seat 1A. When she finally got it, David Sterling, she ran it through her databases. At first, nothing came up. He was a ghost, no social media, no public profiles. But then she cross-referenced it with corporate tech databases, and her screen lit up. The man in seat 1A wasn't just some rich guy. He was David Sterling, the founder and CEO of Grey Wolf Cybersecurity. He was a legendary ethical hacker, a digital phantom, who had saved corporations and governments billions of dollars by finding their security flaws before their enemies did. And her next discovery made her jaw drop. For the past 2 years, Grey Wolf's biggest, most secretive client had been none other than Aerovista Airlines. Sarah Jenkins worked through the night, fueled by coffee and the thrill of a story that was growing more extraordinary with every click. She reached out to a trusted source, a disgruntled former executive in the Aerovista IT department. At first, the source was tight-lipped. But when Sarah mentioned David Sterling and Flight 729, the dam broke. "You have no idea," the source said, his voice a hushed whisper over the encrypted line. "That man basically saved the airline from extinction." The story he told was stunning. 18 months prior, a hostile state-sponsored hacking collective had targeted Aerovista. They weren't after money or passenger data. They were after control. They had developed a terrifyingly sophisticated malware, codenamed Odyssey, designed to infiltrate an aircraft's onboard network through its passenger Wi-Fi, and under the right conditions, give them the ability to interfere with secondary flight systems. It was the stuff of nightmares. Aerovista's internal cybersecurity team had missed it completely. It was David Sterling, hired for a routine systems audit, who discovered the vulnerability. He and his team at Grey Wolf worked for 3 straight months, sleeping in their offices to neutralize the threat and build a new, impenetrable firewall around the airline's entire digital infrastructure. The CEO of Aerovista, a man named Jonathan Pierce, was so grateful and so terrified of the breach ever becoming public that he had given Sterling unprecedented power. They called it the Protocol Zero Directive, the source explained. It's a ghost protocol. It doesn't officially exist on any chart. Pierce gave Sterling a dedicated, encrypted satellite line that rings directly to the CISO, Robert Chen. Sterling was granted the unilateral authority to ground any Aerovista flight at any time from anywhere in the world with no questions asked. His word was to be treated as a direct command from the CEO's office. The logic was simple. If David Sterling, the man who knew their systems better than anyone, ever felt a flight security was compromised digitally or physically, he was the one person they trusted to make the call. He was their ultimate insurance policy. They gave him a special card made of black carbon fiber with nothing on it but a name and a number. It was his license to be the ultimate arbiter of the airline's safety. Sarah Jenkins leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling. The irony was almost too perfect to be real. Brenda Hatcher, in her misguided and prejudiced attempt to perform a security check, had targeted the one passenger on that plane who was the airline's security. She had treated the ultimate insider like an outsider. She had questioned the credentials of the man who held the keys to the entire kingdom. His statement on the phone, "The human element on board has become an unpredictable variable," suddenly made perfect sense. From his perspective, a flight attendant who was irrational, biased, and refusing to follow standard procedure was a security risk. She was a compromised asset. What if there had been a real emergency? Could she be trusted to act rationally? In his professional judgment, she couldn't. So he had shut it down. Sarah now had the full picture. The harassment, the defiant father protecting his child, the secret phone call, the cancelled flight, the hidden backstory of a cyber savior, and the misguided flight attendant who had lit the match. She typed furiously, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The headline came to her instantly. The man they profiled was the man keeping them safe. The story of Aerovista, Flight 729. She knew this story would be explosive. It was about more than just one cancelled flight. It was a story about prejudice power and the stunning karmic consequences of judging a book by its cover. It was the kind of story that didn't just get clicks, it started a global conversation. And Brenda Hatcher, along with the equally culpable Mrs. Davenport, was about to be placed right in the middle of it. Sarah Jenkins' article hit the digital front page of the New York Times like a thunderclap at dawn. It was not merely published, it was unleashed. Before the sun had even risen over the city where the story began, it had already circumnavigated the globe, a viral firestorm of righteous indignation. People in London woke up to it with their morning tea executives in Tokyo, read it on their bullet trains, and by the time California was stirring, the story of Flight 729 was a full-blown cultural phenomenon. The narrative was simply too compelling, too perfectly structured for the modern age of social justice. It had a sympathetic hero in David Sterling, a brilliant, protective father. It had an innocent child, Lily, whose dream vacation was threatened. And it had villains so perfectly cast, they felt like they were from a screenplay. Brenda Hatcher, the overzealous flight attendant, wielding her minor authority like a weapon, and Mrs. Davenport, the sneering, entitled passenger who acted as her accomplice. The digital evidence was the accelerant. The passenger's cell phone video of the confrontation was embedded in the article, its audio stark and damning. Brenda's voice, dripping with condescension, as she demanded ID for a third time, was contrasted with David's superhuman calm. Then came the second clip, Mrs. Davenport's post-flight interview, with the local news, her face a mask of pinched outrage, as she blamed the disruptive man in 1A. On social media, the reaction was explosive. Fly Safe Sterling and Justice for Lily were not just hashtags, they were rallying cries. Memes were created at lightning speed. Brenda's face, was photoshopped onto movie posters for Guess Who's Not Coming to Dinner. Mrs. Davenport was dubbed First Class Felicia. But beneath the mockery, there was a deep, resonating anger. For millions of people, David Sterling's ordeal was a painfully familiar story of being judged, doubted, and presumed guilty for no reason other than their appearance. His quiet, decisive action was a form of catharsis for them all. Inside the gleaming, glass-walled headquarters of Aerovista Airlines, it was utter panic. CEO Jonathan Pierce had been woken by a frantic call from his head of PR at 5:30 a.m. He stood in his penthouse office, watching the pre-market stock ticker on a screen beside a panoramic view of the city. The Aerovista stock AVX was in a freefall, a sheer red cliff, indicating that billions in shareholder value were evaporating with every passing minute. "It's a complete catastrophe, Jonathan," his PR chief Mark said over the speakerphone, his voice strained. "The narrative is locked in. We're the villains. Our employee is the face of corporate-sanctioned racism. And every one of our competitors is going to use this to hammer us for the next decade. Get the board on an emergency video call. Now," Pierce commanded, running a hand through his silver hair. "Legal ops, everyone. I want options." The options, it turned out, were bleak. Legal advised a cautious, non-committal statement. The PR team argued that caution would be seen as cowardice and would only fuel the fire. It was Pierce who made the final call. He had met David Sterling once a year ago, when Sterling had presented the findings on the Odyssey vulnerability. He remembered a man of immense intelligence and quiet dignity. Pierce knew instinctively that this was not a man who exaggerated or sought attention. What Sarah Jenkins's article reported was, without a doubt, the unvarnished truth. "We're not going to fight this," Pierce announced to the stunned faces on his screen. "We're going to own it, every last ugly piece of it. We're going to issue the most profound apology this industry has ever seen. We are going to confirm every word of that article. Mark, you're going to draft a statement that positions David Sterling as the hero he is. You will praise him, you will thank him, and you will make it clear that the employee in question betrayed every value we claim to hold. And you will announce her immediate termination." For Brenda Hatcher, the morning began with a sense of defiant self-righteousness. She had been debriefed by corporate security and sent home still believing she was at worst guilty of a procedural error. She poured her coffee, opened her laptop to start drafting a grievance letter to her union, and saw her own face staring back at her from the lead story on every major news site. Her blood ran cold as she read the article, then watched the videos. She saw herself through the world's eyes, and the image was monstrous. Her phone began to ring, a relentless, unending assault. It was her sister, her ex-husband, friends, all asking the same horrified question. What did you do? An email from the flight attendants' union landed in her inbox. It was a brief, sterile message stating that after reviewing the publicly available evidence, they would not be representing her in this matter. A minute later, the official termination letter from Aerovista HR arrived. 30 years of service, seniority pension, all gone. Erased by an afternoon of prejudice. She was no longer a senior flight attendant. She was a meme, a cautionary tale, a social pariah. The Davenports' karma arrived via text message and panicked phone calls. Mr. Davenport was in his chauffeured Mercedes on the way to his Wall Street office when his largest institutional investor called. The conversation was short. "We're pulling the portfolio, Charles. My board can't be associated with this." The "this" was left hanging in the air, a toxic cloud of public shame. Mrs. Davenport was about to leave for her morning tennis lesson when the president of the Children's Hospital Charity Board called. "Eleanor, the woman said, her voice icy. "The board has voted. We think it's in the best interest of the charity if you tender your resignation. Immediately." When she walked into her exclusive country club for lunch, hoping to find solace among her peers, she was met with averted eyes and whispered conversations that ceased the moment she approached. The social ladder they had spent a lifetime climbing had been kicked out from under them. At the same time, Jonathan Pierce was making the most important call of his career. He had gotten David Sterling's private number from Robert Chen. "Mr. Sterling, this is Jonathan Pierce." He began, his voice devoid of executive bluster, filled only with deep, genuine remorse. "I have no words to adequately express how sorry I am. What happened to you and your daughter on our aircraft is an unforgivable stain on this company. I have fired the employee and I have issued a public statement, but that is not enough. I want to ask you, what can we do to begin to make this right?" On the other end of the line, David, who was sitting with Lily in a quiet VIP lounge at a private airfield, was silent for a moment. He could have demanded millions. He could have filed a lawsuit that would have crippled the airline. But he didn't. "The first thing you can do, Mr. Pierce," David said calmly, "is ensure that this never happens again. Your training is broken. Your corporate culture allowed this to happen." "I know," Pierce admitted. "Help me fix it. Your firm, Grey Wolf. You find vulnerabilities in systems. We have a vulnerability in our human system, a bug in our code of conduct. I want to hire you, Mr. Sterling. I want to pay you to teach us how not to be the company we were yesterday." The irony was staggering. The man they had racially profiled and tried to humiliate was now being offered a multi-million-dollar contract to fundamentally reshape the airline's soul. "I'll have my team draft a proposal," David said. "Second, I would like Aerovista to make a substantial donation to Code for Kids, a non-profit that sets up STEM programs in underserved communities. Make it in my daughter's name." "Done," Pierce said without hesitation. "And your trip to Disneyland. A private jet is waiting for you. It's yours for the week. Please allow us to do at least that." David looked over at Lily, who was happily drawing a picture of a castle. This was the resolution he wanted. Not just punishment for the guilty, but a constructive, positive outcome. The karma wasn't just a destructive force. It could be a creative one, building something better from the wreckage of something ugly. He had turned a moment of personal humiliation into a legacy of corporate reform and a future for countless children. The cascade had washed away the guilty, and in their place left the foundations for something new. 1 week later, the world was a different place. The angry roar of social media had subsided into a steady, respectful hum. The news cycle had moved on to other outrages. But for David and Lily Sterling, the change was far more tangible. They were not in a crowded commercial cabin, subject to the whims and biases of strangers. They were suspended in a tranquil bubble of polished burled walnut and cream-colored leather, cruising at 45,000 feet inside a Gulfstream G650. The aircraft, a marvel of private aviation, chartered for a week at the personal, non-negotiable insistence of Aerovista's CEO, was less a plane and more a penthouse apartment in the sky. The air was cool and filtered the silence, broken only by the faintest whisper of the twin Rolls-Royce engines pushing them across the continent. A dedicated two-person crew, a pilot and a flight concierge named Elena, had greeted them on the tarmac with warm, genuine smiles. Their deference was quiet and profound, a silent acknowledgement of who David was and what he had endured. Lily, untroubled by the memory of the previous flight, was in paradise. She had declared a small divan her official castle, where Captain Barnaby was currently hosting a tea party for a group of imaginary woodland creatures. Eleanor the concierge played along beautifully, serving the bear a miniature porcelain dish containing a single perfect raspberry. For lunch, a personal chef had prepared a meal that defied the laws of airline food: seared salmon with asparagus for David, and a mosaic of star-shaped chicken nuggets, curly fries, and a rainbow fruit salad for Lily. David watched his daughter, a deep sense of peace settling over him, a feeling so complete it was almost startling. He had been in a state of high alert for days, first during the incident, then in the whirlwind of media attention and corporate negotiations that followed. He had carefully managed every press inquiry, through a spokesperson refusing all interviews. He wanted the story to speak for itself. He did not want to become a reluctant celebrity. His only public action was a joint statement with Aerovista announcing the major donation to Code for Kids and the groundbreaking partnership with his firm Grey Wolf Cybersecurity. His phone, connected to the jet's high-speed satellite Wi-Fi, buzzed with a soft notification. It was a news alert linked to a statement from Brenda Hatcher's newly hired crisis PR firm. The headline read, "Former flight attendant apologizes for unconscious bias in Flight 729 incident." Curiosity piqued. David read the carefully crafted paragraphs. It was a symphony of deflection and sanitized regret. Brenda, the statement claimed, was a product of her training, which had over-indexed on security threats. It spoke of a terrible lapse in judgment and the unforeseen and regrettable consequences of her actions. It used the term unconscious bias, 4 separate times a modern shield to absorb the impact of old-fashioned prejudice. David leaned his head back against the soft leather. There was no anger, no satisfaction, just a cold, analytical assessment. He recognized the strategy. By claiming her bias was unconscious, she was abdicating responsibility, framing herself not as an active agent of discrimination, but as a passive victim of a flawed subconscious. It was a cowardly, hollow apology, designed not for forgiveness, but for self-preservation. He felt a brief, clinical pity for a woman whose life had been so thoroughly dismantled, but it was fleeting. Her choices had been conscious: the choice to challenge him, the choice to escalate, the choice to ignore the pleas of another passenger, the choice to bring fear into his daughter's eyes. Those had all been made with a clear and present mind. He swiped the notification away and opened a different file on his tablet, a secure encrypted document titled Aerovista Human Systems Audit Framework. His mind was already on the future, on the work to be done. He began to sketch out a flowchart, his stylus moving quickly across the screen. The problem wasn't just unconscious bias, it was a systemic failure of accountability. His plan was ambitious. Grey Wolf would integrate data from every corner of the airline. They would analyze passenger complaints, cross-referencing them against crew rosters to identify patterns. They would review internal incident reports using machine learning to detect language that suggested bias. They would even develop a voluntary program for flight crews to use simulated training modules, presenting them with challenging social scenarios to see how they reacted under pressure. It wouldn't be about punishment, it would be about data. About identifying vulnerabilities, the Brenda Hatchers of the system, and patching them with targeted training mentorship or reassignment long before they could cause a catastrophic failure like Flight 729. He was treating prejudice like a piece of malicious code, a bug to be isolated and neutralized. Daddy Lily's small voice broke his concentration. She had padded over to his seat, her expression serious. Elena said, "We're flying over the big canyons." Was the other plane, the not-so-fun one, afraid to fly over them? David smiled, putting his tablet aside. Here was the true challenge, explaining the world to his daughter without tainting her view of it. "No, sweetie," he said, pulling her onto his lap. The other plane wasn't afraid. It's just that sometimes people get a little lost. They forget the most important rule. "What's the most important rule?" she asked, her eyes wide. "To be kind," he said simply. "The lady on that plane." She forgot to be kind. And when people forget the rules, sometimes you have to pause the game and start over. So we started over on a much better plane. It was an imperfect analogy, but it was enough. She nodded with the profound solemnity of a 7-year-old accepting a fundamental truth. "We should tell Elena to be kind to Captain Barnaby. I think she's already doing a great job," he chuckled. That conversation was his true victory. He had navigated a storm of public ugliness and brought his daughter through to the other side with her innocence intact. The world had shown him its prejudice, and in return he had shown his daughter only its kindness and wonder. As the plane began its long, graceful descent, the brown, rugged landscape gave way to the sprawling, sun-drenched grid of Southern California. Elena pointed out the window. "On your left, you'll see the Hollywood sign, and if you look carefully just beyond it, you can almost see the castle." Lily pressed her face to the glass, her breath fogging it in excited puffs. "I see it. I see the Magic Kingdom." Daddy David looked out the window, not at the distant theme park, but at the vast, clear blue sky around them. Just a week ago, a similar sky had been the backdrop for one of the most humiliating experiences of his life. Now it was the canvas for his daughter's joy. He had absorbed the hatred, processed it, and transformed it into fuel. Fuel for systemic change at a massive corporation, fuel for the education of children he would never meet, and most importantly, fuel to lift his daughter so high that the shadows of the world below couldn't touch her. He hadn't just won a confrontation. He had reclaimed his peace. He had affirmed his power, not the power to cancel a flight, but the quiet, unshakable power of a father who could steer his daughter's world toward sunlight. And as the wheels of the Gulf Stream touched down on the tarmac with a gentle bump, he knew they had finally arrived at their true destination. The story of David Sterling is a powerful reminder that the person you judge by their cover might just be the author of the entire book. It wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. Brenda Hatcher and the Davenports didn't just have a bad day. They made a choice. They chose prejudice over professionalism, suspicion over service. And the karma that followed wasn't supernatural. It was the direct, real-world consequence of their actions, amplified in an age of instant information. David's true power wasn't cancelling a flight. It was in how he used that moment to create lasting change, ensuring that what happened to him would be less likely to happen to others. What do you think was the airline's response? Enough. Was the public backlash justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of hard karma and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more true life stories where consequences are delivered first class.